The arrest that changed everything. The sun blazed high in the sky, casting long shadows across the busy streets of downtown Atlanta. It was a typical summer afternoon, with the bustling sounds of the city filling the air. Honking cars, the distant hum of conversations, and the rhythmic tapping of feet on the pavement. The outdoor food court, known for its diverse cuisines, was teeming with people, each enjoying the vibrant atmosphere and delicious aromas of freshly prepared meals. Among the crowd was a tall, well-built man named Jamal Bryant. He was a distinguished figure, not just because of his stature, but also for his contributions to the community. Unknown to most, Jamal was not just an ordinary businessman. He had quietly become one of the most influential entrepreneurs in the city, owning several successful tech companies and working tirelessly to improve opportunities for underprivileged youth. Today, however, Jamal wasn't there to talk business. He wanted to enjoy a simple meal, relax, and maybe catch up with some old friends. Dressed casually in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, he easily blended into the crowd, his status hidden by his humble appearance. As he sat at a small table near one of the food vendors, sipping a cold drink and scrolling through his phone, he had no idea that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. Across the street, two police officers sat in their squad car, scanning the area with an unusual intensity. Officer Carter, a veteran of the force with over 20 years of experience, had his eyes locked on Jamal. His partner, Officer Reed, a younger officer eager to prove himself, followed Carter's lead without question. "I think we've got him," Carter said, tapping the dashboard. "That's the guy who matches the description from the drug ring bust last week. African-American male, mid-30s, tall, athletic build, fits perfectly." Reed nodded, glancing at the report on his tablet. "You sure it's him? We can't afford to make a mistake on this one. The chief's been all over us about this case." Carter's jaw tightened. "I'm sure. Trust me, I know a criminal when I see one." The truth was, they were looking for a man who had been involved in a series of drug trafficking operations across the state. Their suspect was known for his dangerous connections and was rumored to be hiding somewhere in the city. But as fate would have it, the real suspect looked nothing like Jamal. Without further hesitation, the officers stepped out of the car and approached Jamal, their hands resting on the holsters of their guns. Jamal noticed them walking toward him, but he didn't think much of it. That is, until Officer Carter grabbed his arm, pulling him roughly out of his chair. "You're under arrest," Carter said, his voice cold and authoritative. "Don't make this any harder than it has to be." Jamal was stunned. "Wait, what? There's got to be some kind of mistake. What am I being arrested for?" Officer Reed began to cuff him while Carter kept a tight grip on his arm. "You know what you did," Carter replied dismissively. "You can explain yourself at the station." People in the food court began to stare, whispering amongst themselves. Jamal's mind raced. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He tried to remain calm, but the situation was escalating fast. "I'm Jamal Bryant. I'm a businessman, not a criminal. Check my ID. Check anything you need. I've done nothing wrong." But Carter wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind, and Reed, though hesitant, followed his lead. They saw what they wanted to see. Another black man who fit their narrow description of a suspect. Jamal's protests fell on deaf ears as the officers dragged him toward their car. Inside, Jamal was silent, trying to process what had just happened. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, the judgment, the disbelief. How could this happen? How could he, a respected member of the community, be treated like this without any explanation? As they drove to the police station, Jamal kept his composure. He knew he had to remain calm, but inside, anger and frustration boiled. This was bigger than just a wrongful arrest. It was about how easily assumptions were made based on skin color, how a person's identity could be reduced to stereotypes in an instant. Upon arrival at the station, the officers pulled Jamal out of the car and led him inside, past a row of desks filled with officers typing away at their computers. Jamal's mind was racing, trying to figure out the best way to clear up this misunderstanding. "I need to speak to a lawyer," Jamal said firmly as they placed him in a holding cell. "I want to make a phone call." Carter smirked. "You'll get your call when we're ready. For now, sit tight." Jamal gritted his teeth, resisting the urge to say more. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat down on the cold bench inside the cell. This was surreal. He couldn't believe that he, a man who had done nothing but give back to the community, was sitting in a jail cell, treated like a common criminal. An hour passed before Officer Reed returned. "You can make your call now," he said, pushing the phone through the bars. Jamal took a deep breath and dialed the number of his attorney, James Richardson, a sharp and well-connected lawyer who had handled many high-profile cases. James answered on the first ring. "James, it's Jamal. I've been arrested. Wrongfully arrested. I need you down here at the station as soon as possible." "What? Arrested? Jamal, what happened?" James' voice was filled with shock. "I'm not even sure. The police think I'm someone else, some kind of criminal. They didn't even let me explain. I'm on my way. Don't say anything else until I get there," James said firmly before hanging up. Jamal exhaled slowly, knowing that help was on the way. But as he sat alone in the cell, he couldn't shake the feeling of injustice that hung in the air. This wasn't just about him. This was about the countless others who had faced similar situations, who had been judged, arrested, or even worse, simply because of the color of their skin. And as he waited, a plan began to form in his mind. This wasn't going to end here. He wasn't just going to fight this for himself. He was going to fight this for everyone who had been wrongfully accused, everyone who had been treated unfairly. Jamal Bryant was not a man to be underestimated, and these officers were about to learn that they had made a grave mistake. The unfolding of injustice. Hours passed inside the cold holding cell, but to Jamal Bryant, it felt like an eternity. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting a harsh, sterile glow on the bleak surroundings. Each minute stretched longer than the last as he sat alone, reflecting on the absurdity of the situation. He had never imagined that one day he'd be in a place like this, falsely accused, stripped of his dignity, and left to wait in the same cell as countless others who had been treated unjustly by the system. Jamal had built his life on principles of integrity, fairness, and hard work. Born and raised in a rough neighborhood, he had defied the odds, becoming a successful tech entrepreneur and philanthropist. But all that success and goodwill seemed to dissolve the moment the officers saw his skin color. They didn't see the man who had donated millions to community programs, nor the mentor who had lifted young black entrepreneurs out of poverty. They only saw a potential threat. Jamal leaned his head against the wall, trying to push away the frustration and helplessness that gnawed at him. He knew he had to stay composed. The last thing he needed was to give the police any reason to escalate the situation further. His lawyer, James Richardson, would be here soon, and then they could start to unravel this mess. Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, Officer Carter sat at his desk, feeling more than a little satisfied. He had a hunch about Jamal, and in his mind, hunches were as good as evidence. He was the kind of cop who prided himself on his instincts, convinced he could spot a criminal from a mile away. And to him, Jamal fit the profile. A black man sitting alone in a crowded public space, looking like he didn't belong. It didn't matter that Jamal hadn't been doing anything suspicious. Carter believed his gut and followed it, as he always did. His younger partner, Officer Reed, wasn't so sure. As he shuffled through paperwork, reviewing the case files, something didn't sit right with him. Reed had only been on the force for a few years, but he had already seen enough to know that mistakes happened, especially when biases went unchecked. He glanced at the mug shot of their actual suspect, a known drug trafficker named Tyrone Matthews, and compared it to Jamal's photo. "Carter," Reed called out hesitantly, "are we sure about this guy? Matthews and Bryant don't look that much alike." Carter waved him off. "Trust me, kid. Criminals blend in. They've gotten smarter over the years. Just because this guy's clean-cut and owns a few businesses doesn't mean he's not involved in something dirty. It's probably just a front. Reed frowned but didn't push back. Carter was a seasoned officer, and the rookie wasn't about to challenge him in front of the rest of the department. Still, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a big mistake. Something about Jamal's demeanor when they arrested him, the calmness, the insistence on his innocence, didn't match the profile of someone with a shady past. While Carter continued to type up his report, Reed decided to take a closer look at Jamal's background. He ran a quick search on his computer and was surprised by what he found. Jamal Bryant wasn't just a businessman. He was a major philanthropist in the city. His name was attached to various charitable organizations, youth mentorship programs, and scholarships for underprivileged students. He had been invited to speak at numerous conferences and had even been recognized by the mayor for his contributions to the community. Reed's heart sank. This wasn't just some random guy. This was a man who had dedicated his life to helping others, and now they had him sitting in a jail cell like a common criminal. Reed stood up and walked over to Carter's desk, feeling a surge of nervous energy. "Hey, Carter," he said cautiously. "I did some digging on Bryant. He's not who we think he is. He's a big name in the community. Philanthropist, entrepreneur, even close with some of the city's leaders. I think we might have made a mistake here." Carter looked up from his computer, his expression hardening. "What's your point, Reed?" "My point is, maybe we should have checked his ID, run a more thorough background check before we hauled him in. This guy doesn't fit the profile of the suspect we're after." Carter's face flushed with annoyance. "Kid, you're too green to understand how this works. Just because someone's got a shiny resume doesn't mean they're innocent. These guys are good at covering their tracks. Look, let's just get this processed, and if it turns out he's clean, we'll cut him loose. But until then, he stays." Reed clenched his jaw, realizing that Carter wasn't going to budge. There was something deeply unsettling about the situation, but without more concrete evidence, he didn't have the authority to challenge his superior's judgment. He returned to his desk, his mind racing. He would keep an eye on things, but for now, his hands were tied. Meanwhile, across town, James Richardson, Jamal's lawyer, was speeding toward the station. He had received Jamal's call just an hour earlier and had immediately cleared his schedule. James was known as one of the best defense attorneys in the city, and he had made a career out of defending clients who were often unfairly targeted by the justice system. He had seen far too many cases like this one. Black men wrongfully accused, their reputations tarnished, their lives turned upside down by hasty decisions and deep-seated biases. As he pulled into the parking lot of the police station, James felt a familiar mixture of anger and determination surge through him. He knew what he was walking into. The challenge wasn't just to get Jamal out of jail. It was to confront the system that allowed things like this to happen in the first place. James strode into the station with purpose, his sharp suit and commanding presence turning heads as he walked up to the front desk. "I'm here to see Jamal Bryant," he said firmly. "He was arrested earlier today, and I'm his attorney." The desk sergeant raised an eyebrow, but didn't protest. "I'll get someone to take you to him. Wait here." James crossed his arms, tapping his foot impatiently as he waited. He had already prepared his arguments, knowing full well that this wasn't just about proving Jamal's innocence. It was about making a statement, about showing that men like Jamal could not be railroaded by a broken system. When Officer Reed appeared to escort him to the holding area, James immediately recognized the conflicted look on the young officer's face. He had seen it before. An officer who knew something wasn't right, but didn't have the power or courage to challenge the status quo. "Mr. Bryant is in the holding cell," Reed said quietly. "I'll take you there now." As they walked through the station's hallways, James made note of every detail. The officers working at their desks, the buzzing conversations, the dim lighting. It was a place built on authority and control, and James knew how to navigate it. When they reached Jamal's cell, the look of relief on his client's face was palpable. Jamal stood up from the bench, his posture still tall and proud despite the circumstances. "James, thank God you're here," Jamal said, his voice steady but weary. James nodded firmly. "Don't worry, Jamal. We're going to get you out of here. This is a mistake, and I'm going to make sure they realize that." Officer Reed unlocked the cell door, allowing James to step inside. As Jamal sat back down, James lowered his voice, speaking in a tone that was both reassuring and urgent. "I've been looking into your case. It's clear to me that they arrested you on mistaken identity. The problem is, these kinds of mistakes don't just happen in a vacuum. They're part of a much larger issue, a system that's quick to judge based on skin color, that doesn't take the time to listen or investigate properly. But trust me, we're not going to let them get away with this." Jamal nodded, his expression resolute. "I appreciate that, James. I knew something like this could happen one day, but it doesn't make it any easier. I've worked my whole life to get where I am, and it feels like all of that can be taken away in an instant." James placed a hand on his shoulder. "It won't be. Not as long as I'm here. But we're going to have to fight this, and it might get messy." Jamal exhaled slowly. He had always known that success as a black man in America came with challenges, but this, being wrongfully arrested, stripped of his dignity, felt like an attack on everything he had worked for. But as he looked at James, he realized that this wasn't just about him. It was about standing up for every black man, woman, and child who had been treated unfairly by a system that saw them as less. "I'm ready to fight," Jamal said quietly but firmly. "Whatever it takes." James smiled, a spark of determination in his eyes. "Good, because we're just getting started. The battle begins." The cold steel bars clanged behind James Richardson as he left Jamal's cell, his mind racing. This wasn't just another wrongful arrest. This was personal. For far too long, he had watched black men be targeted, profiled, and humiliated by a system that claimed to be just. Today it was Jamal Bryant, a man who had built a name for himself through grit and perseverance. But tomorrow, it could be anyone else. It could be a father, a brother, a son. As James walked through the hallways of the police station, he felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for Jamal's freedom. He was fighting for something much larger: the dignity and humanity of black men and women everywhere. "Officer Reed, can we talk for a moment?" James called out, catching up with the younger officer. Reed looked slightly startled but nodded, stepping aside with James into a quiet corridor. "I can tell you're not fully on board with this arrest," James said, cutting straight to the point. "Your gut's telling you something is off, right?" Reed shifted uncomfortably, but finally nodded. "Look, I'm new here. I don't want to step on any toes. But yeah, something about this doesn't feel right. Jamal Bryant, he's not some street thug. He's one of the most respected figures in this city." James studied Reed's face, seeing the conflict etched in his features. The young cop was torn between loyalty to his superior and doing what was right. "I get it," James said softly. "You're new, and you don't want to challenge the status quo. But here's the thing. The status quo is broken. If we don't challenge it, it's people like Jamal who suffer. And trust me, once they've done this to one innocent man, they'll keep doing it to others." Reed looked down, the weight of James' words sinking in. He had grown up idolizing police officers, believing in the power of justice and the importance of protecting the community. But lately he had begun to see cracks in that ideal. The truth was, not everything was as black and white as the uniform he wore. He had witnessed firsthand how some officers treated people based on appearances, not facts. "I'll help in any way I can," Reed finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I have to be careful. Carter's not the kind of guy you want to cross." James nodded, appreciating Reed's courage. "I understand. But if you see anything at all that might help prove Jamal's innocence, let me know. You're in a unique position to make a real difference." Reed nodded again, his expression thoughtful. As James walked away, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Reed could be the key to uncovering the truth. Meanwhile, back in the holding cell, Jamal sat in silence, his mind racing through every possible scenario. He had faith in James. His lawyer was one of the best, and Jamal knew that James wouldn't rest until this injustice was corrected. But even with that faith, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of betrayal. He had done everything right in life. He had worked hard, given back to his community, stayed out of trouble. Yet here he was, being treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. The hours dragged on, but Jamal refused to let despair take hold. He was a fighter. His mother had raised him to never give up, no matter how hard things got. And this wrongful arrest was just another fight he would have to win. As he sat there, memories of his past began to flood his mind. He remembered growing up in a poor neighborhood, watching his friends and neighbors were routinely harassed by the police. He had always been the one who avoided trouble, who kept his head down and focused on his future. His mother had drilled into him that he had to be twice as good, twice as careful, because the world would never give him the same chances as others. And now, even after all his success, after proving everyone wrong, here he was, reduced to just another black man in a holding cell. The anger simmered deep inside him, but he kept it in check. He knew better than to let that anger show. That's what they expected, an outburst, a reason to escalate things. But Jamal wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Suddenly, the cell door opened and Officer Carter appeared, his face set in a smug expression. "Bryant," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've got a visitor." Jamal stood up slowly, his eyes narrowing at Carter. There was something about the way the officer carried himself that grated on Jamal's nerves. Carter seemed to take pleasure in seeing him locked up, as if it validated some deep-seated belief he held. "Your lawyer's here to see you," Carter added, his tone mocking. "Let's hope he can pull some magic tricks, because from where I'm standing, things aren't looking too good for you." Jamal clenched his jaw but remained silent. He followed Carter down the dimly lit hallway, refusing to be goaded by the officer's taunts. When they reached the interrogation room, James was already seated, his expression grim but determined. "Jamal," James said, standing up as Jamal entered, "we need to talk." Carter left them alone, closing the door behind him with a smirk. Jamal sat down across from James, his eyes locked on his lawyer's face. "What's going on?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but tense. James took a deep breath before speaking. "They're trying to charge you with drug possession and conspiracy to distribute. They claim you fit the profile of a man they've been investigating for months, a known drug dealer who's been operating in the city." Jamal's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? That's insane. I don't even know what they're talking about." "I know," James said quickly, "and we're going to prove that. But the problem is, they've got nothing concrete to hold you on. No evidence, no witnesses, nothing. This whole thing is based on suspicion and appearance, and that's what makes it so difficult." Jamal's hands clenched into fists under the table. "So they can just throw me in jail because I look like someone they're after. That's what this comes down to." James nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, yes. It's not right, but it happens more often than you'd think. But we're not going to let them get away with this. I've already started building your defense, and I'm pushing for an immediate release on lack of evidence. We're going to take this to the media too, if we have to." Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. The thought of his name being dragged through the mud in the media terrified him. His reputation, everything he had worked for, could be ruined in an instant. But at the same time, he knew that if they didn't shine a light on this injustice, it would continue to happen, to him and to others like him. "Do whatever you have to do," Jamal said, his voice low but resolute. "I won't let them destroy me. And I won't let them get away with this." James nodded, a fire in his eyes. "Good, because this is just the beginning. Later that evening, back at the police station, Reed sat at his desk, replaying the day's events in his mind. Something still didn't sit right with him about the arrest. He had been raised to believe in justice and fairness, but what he had seen today didn't feel like justice at all. It felt like racial profiling, pure and simple. Unable to shake the feeling, Reed decided to take matters into his own hands. He waited until Carter had gone home for the night, then snuck back into the evidence room. He had to find out more about the case they had built against Jamal. If there was even the slightest chance that they had the wrong man, Reed couldn't let this stand. As he sifted through the case files, Reed's heart raced. He found the surveillance footage from the day of Jamal's arrest, the footage that had supposedly linked Jamal to the drug dealer they were after. But as he watched the video, his heart sank. The suspect looked nothing like Jamal. The height was wrong, the build was different, and the man in the video had a distinctive tattoo on his neck, something Jamal clearly didn't have. Reed paused the video, staring at the screen in disbelief. They had the wrong man. There was no doubt about it now. But how was he going to convince Carter and the rest of the department that they had made a huge mistake? His mind raced as he realized the implications. This wasn't just a simple case of mistaken identity. It was a potential PR nightmare for the department, and exposing the truth could have serious consequences. But Reed knew he couldn't live with himself if he stayed silent. Gathering his courage, Reed copied the video onto a flash drive. He had to act fast, but he also had to be smart about it. If Carter found out what he was doing, Reed could lose his job, or worse. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over the city, Reed made a decision that would change everything. He was going to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The turning point. As dawn broke over the city, casting golden rays of light through the windows of the police station, Officer Reed sat at his desk, staring at the flash drive in his hand. The weight of the decision he had made felt monumental. He knew that the evidence he had found could turn the tide for Jamal Bryant, but he also understood the risk involved. If he was caught exposing his colleagues' mistakes, his career could be over before it even began. After taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Reed stood up and walked toward the door leading to the precinct's main office. The buzz of chatter filled the air, punctuated by the clattering of keyboards and the ringing of phones. He spotted Carter in the break room, laughing with a few other officers, seemingly oblivious to the chaos he was creating in the lives of innocent people. Reed shook his head, refusing to let doubt creep in. He had to be strong, not just for Jamal, but for every other person who had been wrongfully targeted. He knew that being a police officer came with a responsibility to protect and serve, not to perpetuate injustices. "Reed, you coming for coffee?" one of the officers called out, interrupting his thoughts. Yeah, just a second," he replied, forcing a smile as he joined them. But his mind was elsewhere, contemplating how to present the evidence without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Jamal was doing everything he could to stay focused. Each hour felt like an eternity, and he could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface. He knew he had to keep his cool. One wrong move could jeopardize everything James was working to accomplish. Thoughts of his family and friends flooded his mind. How could he explain this situation to his mother, who had sacrificed so much for him to succeed? The embarrassment, the humiliation, it was all too much. As he paced in his cell, he thought about his community. He had worked tirelessly to improve lives around him, to uplift those who felt lost and powerless. But now he was in the very system he had fought against. Jamal's determination ignited anew. He would not be defined by this wrongful arrest. Instead, he would use this experience to educate others about the systemic issues plaguing their society. When James returned to the holding area, a sense of relief washed over Jamal. "Hey," James said, a glimmer of optimism in his eyes. "I have some news." "Is it good news?" Jamal asked, his heart racing. James took a seat across from Jamal. "We're making progress. I spoke to Officer Reed, and he seems to have some concerns about how you were arrested. Jamal leaned forward, intrigued. What do you mean? Reed mentioned that he's been noticing some irregularities in the case. He even hinted that he might be willing to help us. I think he's starting to question the way things are being done here, James explained. That's encouraging, Jamal said, a hint of hope creeping into his voice. If he can get us access to the evidence, we might stand a chance. James nodded. Exactly. But we need to be careful. If word gets out that we're challenging the department, it could backfire. We have to play our cards right. Jamal sat back, processing the information. I understand. But I want to make sure we're not just fighting for me. We're fighting for everyone who's been wrongfully accused. That's the spirit, James said, his smile widening. We'll make sure your story gets out there. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about changing the system. Back at the precinct, Reed was preparing for a confrontation he had never imagined himself in. He had drafted a report detailing his findings, carefully outlining the discrepancies he had noted in the arrest records and the video evidence. It was time to take the flash drive to his superior, but fear clawed at him. Would they dismiss him? Would they turn against him? He took another deep breath and walked to Captain Harris's office, where he knocked tentatively on the door. Captain, can I speak with you for a moment? Come in, Reed, Captain Harris called from inside. Reed stepped into the office, which was cluttered with files and papers. The captain looked up from his desk, an eyebrow raised. What's on your mind? I've come across some evidence regarding the Jamal Bryant case. Reed began, struggling to keep his voice steady. I think there's been a mistake. A mistake. Captain Harris leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. What kind of mistake are we talking about? Reed hesitated but pressed on. The surveillance footage doesn't match Bryant. The person arrested doesn't fit the description of the suspect we're looking for. I believe we've wrongfully detained him. The captain's expression hardened. You're questioning the department's procedures, Reed. Be careful where you tread. I understand, sir, Reed replied, determined. But this isn't just about procedures. This is about a man's life. If we don't correct this, it'll haunt us all. Captain Harris's face remained impassive as he looked Reed over. So you're saying you want to take this to internal affairs? You think they'll back you on this? No, sir, Reed said quickly. I want to make sure we handle this internally first. I've got proof that we're making a grave mistake. I just need a chance to show you. Captain Harris sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Fine. Show me what you've got. Reed handed over the flash drive, his heart racing. This was it, his moment of truth. The captain plugged it into his computer, and Reed watched as the footage played on the screen. As the video rolled, Reed pointed out the discrepancies, explaining how the suspect looked nothing like Jamal. The tension in the room was palpable as Captain Harris scrutinized the footage. After what felt like an eternity, the captain turned to Reed, his expression unreadable. This doesn't look good, he finally said, his voice low. I know, sir, but we need to act fast. If we don't do something, Jamal could be charged and imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, Reed urged, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Captain Harris leaned back in his chair, contemplating the situation. You realize that bringing this to light could lead to major backlash for the department. We're talking about the integrity of our entire unit here. Reed swallowed hard. I understand, but we also have a duty to uphold the law and protect innocent people. If we stay silent, we become part of the problem. The captain regarded him for a long moment, and Reed could see the internal struggle play out on his face. Finally, he spoke, his tone resolute. All right, Reed. I'll look into this further, but you better be sure of your facts. If you're wrong, it could cost you everything. Reed nodded, determination flooding his veins. I'm sure. I won't let you down. Later that day, Reed returned to the holding area, determined to speak with Jamal and James. He had hoped that he could help turn the tide, but he also knew he had to be cautious. If the news of his whistleblowing got out, it could lead to trouble for all of them. "Hey, Jamal," Reed said as he entered the small room where Jamal was waiting. Jamal looked up, his eyes widening with interest. "Officer Reed, did you find anything?" "I think I have something that could help your case," Reed replied, glancing over his shoulder to ensure they were alone. "But we need to act fast." James, who had been sitting quietly, leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "I managed to pull some footage from the day of your arrest. It shows discrepancies in the police report. If we can get this evidence into the right hands, we might be able to prove your innocence," Reed explained, a sense of urgency in his voice. Jamal's eyes lit up with hope. "That's incredible. But how do we get it out there? We can't trust the department to do the right thing." "We'll have to go public," James chimed in, his expression serious. "But we need to strategize. We can't just throw it out there without a plan. We need allies, people who can help us amplify our voices." "Who do you have in mind?" Reed asked, feeling the weight of their circumstances pressing down on him. "I have some connections in the media. If we can get them to see the footage and the injustice, we can create enough pressure to force the department to take action," James replied, his voice steady. Jamal nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Then let's do it. I refuse to be another victim of this system." Reed felt a swell of pride for Jamal's strength. It was inspiring to see him refuse to back down. "I'll gather everything I have and meet you both later. We'll work together to make sure your story gets out there." As they discussed their next steps, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something significant. This was no longer just about one man's fight for justice. It was about shining a light on the systemic injustices that plagued their communities. They would use this opportunity to advocate for change, to give a voice to those who had been silenced for far too long. Later that evening, as Reed sat in his apartment, he felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders, but he was committed to doing the right thing. He began to draft a message to the media, outlining the facts of the case and the potential evidence they had to support Jamal's claims. With each word, he felt more empowered, knowing that he was taking a stand against the very system he had sworn to uphold. He hoped that together they could create a ripple effect that would inspire others to join the fight against injustice. As he finished typing, Reed's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from James, urging him to meet them at a nearby cafe. They were ready to take the next step in their fight for justice, and Reed knew he couldn't hesitate any longer. The night air was cool as Reed made his way to the cafe, his heart pounding with anticipation. This was more than just a meeting. It was a pivotal moment in their struggle against the injustices of the system. They were united in purpose, ready to confront the challenges ahead, knowing that together they could create the change they desperately sought. In the distance, the lights of the city twinkled like stars, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could prevail. Little did they know, the battle ahead would not only test their resolve, but also inspire countless others to rise up and fight for what was right. As they gathered at the cafe, their spirits high, the sense of urgency in the air was palpable. This was their moment to shine a light on the truth, to show the world that they would not back down in the face of adversity. They had each other, and together they were ready to confront the challenges that lay ahead. The fight for justice was just beginning. Rallying the community. The cafe buzzed with energy as Reed, Jamal, and James gathered around a small table tucked away in the corner. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the chatter of patrons who were blissfully unaware of the monumental conversation taking place just a few feet away. "We have to be strategic about this," James said, his voice low but firm. "We can't just dump the evidence on the media and expect them to run with it. We need to build a narrative that resonates with people." Jamal nodded, his expression serious. "I agree. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone who's been wrongfully treated, everyone who's ever felt powerless against a system that's supposed to protect us." Reed sipped his coffee, his mind racing. What if we organized a community meeting? We could invite local activists, community leaders, and even journalists. If we can get enough people involved, we could create a movement. James leaned back in his chair, considering the idea. That could work. We can share your story, Jamal, and present the evidence. If we get the media involved, we can amplify our message. People need to see the bigger picture. I love it, Jamal said, his excitement bubbling to the surface. But we need to make sure we have a solid plan. I don't want to just talk about the issues. I want us to come up with actionable steps. Reed glanced around the cafe, spotting a bulletin board filled with flyers for various community events. What if we designed a flyer for the meeting? We can post it around the neighborhood to draw in more people. That's a great idea, James replied, pulling out his phone. Let's start drafting a flyer right now. We need to make sure it's eye-catching and highlights the urgency of the situation. As they began brainstorming the details, a sense of purpose enveloped them. They were no longer just three individuals fighting a personal battle. They were part of a larger movement to address systemic injustices. The cafe buzzed around them, but they were focused, determined to make their voices heard. The following week, they put their plan into action. With the help of local activists, they secured a community center for the meeting. Reed reached out to contacts in the media, alerting them to the event and the significance of Jamal's case. Flyers were plastered throughout the neighborhood, drawing interest from residents eager to learn more. As the day of the meeting approached, anticipation filled the air. Jamal felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. Would people show up? Would they be willing to listen? He wanted to believe that change was possible, that they could rally together to confront the injustices they faced. On the evening of the meeting, the community center buzzed with energy as people trickled in. Jamal arrived early, standing at the entrance to greet attendees as they arrived. The room was filled with a diverse group of individuals: young families, elderly residents, activists, and community leaders, each bringing their own stories and experiences. Reed and James worked behind the scenes, setting up the projector and ensuring the evidence would be visible to everyone in attendance. As the minutes passed, Jamal felt a sense of camaraderie building in the room. This was more than just a gathering. It was a movement. When it was time to start, Jamal took a deep breath, stepping up to the front of the room. He glanced out at the sea of faces, a mixture of apprehension and hope swirling within him. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady. "I stand before you not just as a man wrongfully accused, but as a member of this community who believes we can create change." The audience listened intently, their eyes fixed on him. Jamal spoke passionately about his experiences, the injustice he faced, and the urgent need for change within the system. "This isn't just my story. It's a story that resonates with so many of you who have faced similar challenges. Together, we can demand accountability and fight for justice." As he shared his experiences, he also highlighted the systemic issues that had allowed such injustices to occur. He spoke about the importance of community unity and the need to hold law enforcement accountable. The room filled with murmurs of agreement, and Jamal could see the fire igniting in the eyes of those around him. James stepped forward to present the evidence they had compiled. "We have video footage and records that show the discrepancies in the arrest process. This is about more than just Jamal's case. It's about ensuring that no one else has to go through what he did," he explained. The room was charged with energy as Reed took the stage next, sharing his journey as an officer who was willing to speak out against the injustices within his own department. "It's important for us as officers to recognize our responsibility to the communities we serve. We cannot turn a blind eye to the wrongs happening around us," he said, receiving a mix of applause and surprised looks. After the presentations, they opened the floor for questions and discussion. Hands shot up, and the room erupted with voices eager to share their experiences and thoughts. A young woman stood up, her voice trembling with emotion. "I felt powerless for so long. I've watched my friends get stopped for no reason, and it breaks my heart. Hearing your story gives me hope." Jamal nodded, appreciating her courage. "You're not powerless. We have the power to make change together. It starts with us speaking out, sharing our stories, and supporting one another." An elderly man stood, his eyes filled with determination. "I've seen the changes in this community over the years, and it's time we stand up and demand better for our children and grandchildren. I want to help." As the evening progressed, a palpable sense of unity filled the room. People exchanged contact information, forming connections and pledging to work together to advocate for change. Jamal's heart swelled with gratitude as he realized the impact they were having. This was a movement, not just for him, but for everyone who had been wronged. As the meeting drew to a close, Jamal felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. They had ignited a fire within the community, a collective desire to confront the injustices they faced. They had created a space for healing, dialogue, and action, and it was only the beginning. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Jamal said, his voice full of conviction. "Let's keep this momentum going. We have the power to change our community for the better, and together, we will not be silenced." As the crowd dispersed, individuals lingered, discussing plans for future gatherings and ways to raise awareness. Jamal felt hopeful for the first time in a long time. They were no longer just victims of circumstance. They were warriors for justice, ready to take on the system that had failed them. In the days that followed, the meeting sparked a flurry of activity. Jamal, Reed, and James worked tirelessly to organize rallies, press conferences, and community outreach programs. The media began to pick up on the story, shining a spotlight on Jamal's case and the larger issues at play. As word spread, more individuals came forward, sharing their own experiences of wrongful arrests and discrimination. The community rallied behind them, demanding accountability and reform. Jamal found himself speaking at various events, sharing his story and encouraging others to take a stand. But as the movement grew, so did the challenges. There were threats and pushback from individuals within the police department who were resistant to change. Jamal received anonymous messages warning him to back down, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. With every challenge, he grew more resolute in his commitment to fighting for justice. One evening, as Jamal sat with Reed and James at a local diner, he expressed his concerns. "I'm grateful for the support we've received, but I can't help but feel anxious. What if they try to silence us?" Reed leaned forward, his expression serious. "They might try, but we have the community behind us. We've built a movement, and movements are powerful. They can't ignore the voices of the people." James nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "This is bigger than any one of us. We're fighting for change, and that's worth every risk we take. We need to stay focused on our goal." With renewed determination, they strategized for the upcoming rally, where they planned to present their evidence and call for policy reform. The stakes were high, but they knew they had to keep pushing forward. They were no longer just fighting for Jamal. They were fighting for every person who had ever felt the weight of injustice. As they left the diner, Jamal felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he also felt the strength of the community rallying behind him. Together, they were forging a path toward change, one step at a time. The fight for justice was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their pursuit of truth and equality. A new dawn. The day of the rally dawned bright and clear, the sun casting a warm glow over the city. Jamal stood at the front of the community center, surrounded by supporters and fellow activists who had gathered to stand in solidarity against injustice. Banners hung overhead, proclaiming messages of unity and hope, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Jamal could feel the energy of the crowd, a potent mix of determination and resilience. As he prepared to address the gathering, he reflected on how far they had come. Just a few weeks ago, he had felt isolated and powerless. Now he stood among a diverse coalition of people committed to fighting against systemic injustices. This movement was not just about him. It was a powerful reminder that they were all interconnected in their struggles for equality. As the rally kicked off, Reed and James took the stage first. Reed, now a beloved figure in the community for his willingness to speak out against injustices within the police force, addressed the crowd with a sense of urgency. Today, we gather not just for Jamal, but for every person who has faced discrimination, for every voice that has been silenced. We will not back down until we see change. The crowd erupted in applause, their voices rising like a wave of support. Jamal watched as Reed spoke passionately, his words resonating deeply with those in attendance. It was a reminder that change often begins with courageous individuals who are willing to confront the status quo. Next, it was Jamal's turn to take the mic. As he stepped up, he could see familiar faces in the crowd. Family members, friends, and supporters who had joined him in this fight. He took a deep breath, channeling the energy of those around him. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady and resolute. "This isn't just a rally, it's a movement. We're here to demand justice, accountability, and change." He recounted his own experiences, sharing the painful details of his wrongful arrest and the impact it had on his life. But instead of despair, he focused on hope and empowerment. "Every one of you has the power to make a difference. We've gathered here not just to share our stories, but to unite our voices. Together, we can create a future where no one has to endure the injustices I faced." As he spoke, Jamal noticed members of the media capturing his words, their cameras flashing. This was the exposure they needed to shine a light on their cause and amplify their message. He spoke not just to the crowd before him, but to the wider audience that would hear their story through the news. After Jamal's speech, various community leaders took the stage, each sharing their own stories and experiences. They spoke about police accountability, community support, and the need for systemic reform. Each voice added to the chorus of hope and determination, weaving a tapestry of solidarity that resonated deeply with those in attendance. The rally culminated in a march through the city, with supporters holding signs that read "Justice for Jamal," "End Systemic Racism," and "We Are One." Jamal walked at the front of the procession, surrounded by people chanting and singing, their voices rising in unison. It was a beautiful sight, a collective movement, powered by love and a desire for justice. As they marched, Jamal felt a profound sense of purpose. Each step was a reminder that they were not alone in their fight. They were part of something much larger. The crowd stretched for blocks, a powerful visual representation of their unity. Along the route, they passed key landmarks, the police station, the courthouse, places that held memories of pain and struggle. But today, those spaces took on new meaning. They were no longer symbols of oppression, but places where change could begin. At one point during the march, they stopped at the police station, where Jamal spoke again. "This is where we need to see change. We demand transparency, accountability, and respect for our community." His voice rang out, echoing off the walls of the building. The crowd cheered, their energy unwavering. Suddenly, as they stood in front of the police station, a police officer approached the crowd. He was an officer Jamal recognized, one who had previously played a role in his wrongful arrest. Jamal's heart raced. What would happen now? "Excuse me," the officer called out, his voice firm but calm. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Jamal exchanged glances with Reed and James, who stood beside him, both visibly tense. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on Jamal and the officer. With resolve, Jamal stepped forward. "What do you want to say?" The officer hesitated, clearly taken aback by the collective energy of the crowd. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know the full story then. I see now how wrong things were, and I want to do better." Jamal was momentarily stunned. He had anticipated a confrontation, not an apology. "Thank you for saying that," he replied, feeling a flicker of hope. "But words are not enough. We need real change. We need accountability." The officer nodded. "I agree. We need to listen to the community. I'm here to help. I want to be part of that change." The crowd erupted in applause, some chanting, "Change is coming." It was a moment of unexpected healing, illustrating the power of dialogue and understanding. As the rally continued, the group marched toward the local news station. Their aim was clear. They wanted their story broadcasted to a larger audience. Upon arrival, Jamal took the stage again, this time addressing the assembled reporters. "We are here to share a message of hope and resilience," he said, his voice passionate and unwavering. "This movement is not just about my story. It's about everyone who has faced injustice. We need the media to help us amplify our voices, to shine a light on the issues we're facing as a community. Together, we can change the narrative." After the rally, the news station aired coverage of the event, capturing Jamal's powerful messages and the overwhelming support from the community. That night, the footage of the rally spread across social media platforms, drawing attention from people far beyond their city. Hashtags like #JusticeForJamal and #EndSystemicRacism began to trend, creating a ripple effect that resonated nationwide. As days turned into weeks, Jamal and his allies continued their work. The momentum from the rally fueled their efforts, and they organized meetings with local officials, urging them to implement policy changes that would promote transparency and accountability within the police force. They crafted a comprehensive proposal, outlining specific reforms aimed at preventing future injustices. Their demands included mandatory training on implicit bias, community policing initiatives, and the establishment of an independent review board to investigate complaints against officers. Jamal also made a point to engage with community members who had previously felt disenfranchised. He visited schools and community centers, sharing his story and encouraging others to get involved. The movement gained traction as more individuals began to voice their experiences, creating a sense of solidarity that was impossible to ignore. As they worked tirelessly, Jamal often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had faced deep pain and struggle, but those experiences had ignited a fire within him. He realized that every obstacle he encountered had only strengthened his resolve. Months later, Jamal stood before the city council, ready to present their proposal for reform. The room was filled with supporters, their presence a testament to the power of community action. As he looked out at the faces of friends, family, and allies, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. "This is a pivotal moment for our community," he began, his voice steady and resolute. "Today, we are not just presenting a proposal, we are demanding change. We are here to ensure that no one else has to endure the pain and humiliation that I faced." He outlined their demands, articulating the need for systemic change and the importance of fostering trust between law enforcement and the community. His words echoed in the chamber, resonating with those present. As he concluded, the council members looked at one another, some nodding in agreement. The atmosphere in the room shifted, a sense of urgency palpable in the air. Days later, the city council convened to vote on the proposed reforms. Jamal and his supporters waited anxiously for the outcome. When the results were announced, tears of joy filled Jamal's eyes. Overwhelmingly, the council had approved their proposal. The victory marked a turning point for Jamal and the community. Their voices had been heard, their demands acknowledged, and change was on the horizon. As Jamal stood with his friends and supporters in the aftermath of the vote, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had sparked a movement, and their journey was far from over. Together, they would continue to advocate for justice and equality, ensuring that their community remained united in the fight for what was right. Months turned into years, and Jamal became a leading voice in the movement for reform. He worked alongside community leaders, advocating for further changes, and creating programs that promoted education and awareness around issues of justice and equality. His story was now a beacon of hope, inspiring countless others to speak out against injustices in their own lives. The movement had grown into a powerful coalition, bringing together people from all walks of life, each committed to making their community a better place. As he reflected on his journey, Jamal realized that what had started as a personal battle had transformed into a collective struggle for justice. He had turned his pain into purpose, and in doing so, he had inspired others to do the same. Standing on a stage at a community event, he looked out at the crowd, diverse, vibrant, and united. "We are stronger together," he declared, his heart swelling with pride. "This is just the beginning. Together, we will continue to fight for justice, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come." And in that moment, as the crowd cheered and the energy surged, Jamal knew that their efforts would leave an indelible mark on their community, paving the way for a brighter, more equitable future for all.